Validation feels harmless because it appears supportive, affirming, and emotionally intelligent. Many men believe validation strengthens connection by reassuring the other person that they are seen, valued, and understood. In logical systems, validation reduces friction. It smooths interaction and aligns perspectives. In emotional systems, however, validation carries structural weight. It does not simply acknowledge feelings, it positions the man in relation to them. The moment validation becomes a reflex rather than a choice, it shifts orientation. The man begins responding to emotions as if they require confirmation to remain stable. This subtly places emotional authority outside himself. He is no longer relating from alignment. He is responding to maintain equilibrium. The woman senses this shift immediately. Validation stops feeling like support and starts feeling like accommodation. The relationship becomes emotionally asymmetrical. Validation feels safe because it avoids conflict, but it introduces dependency on agreement. Over time, this erodes polarity. Attraction does not respond to being validated. It responds to coherence. When validation replaces grounded presence, it becomes more dangerous than rejection because it teaches the system that stability depends on emotional approval rather than internal orientation. When validation is offered repeatedly, especially in moments of uncertainty or tension, it begins training emotional dependence on both sides. The man learns that emotional discomfort can be relieved by affirmation. The woman learns that emotional signals produce immediate adjustment. This creates a loop. Emotional expression becomes a lever rather than a state. The man may believe he is being empathetic, but he is also teaching the relationship that feelings must be responded to in order to be resolved. This removes resilience from the system. Small fluctuations begin to require processing. Disagreement becomes destabilizing rather than informative. Validation, instead of calming the dynamic, increases sensitivity to misalignment. The woman does not feel stronger because she is validated. She feels more uncertain because her emotions now carry weight. The man does not feel closer. He feels responsible. Over time, validation becomes emotional labor. The relationship feels heavy despite constant reassurance. This is why validation often correlates with increased anxiety rather than security. It conditions both parties to rely on external confirmation instead of internal regulation. Until validation is decoupled from outcome management, it continues weakening the dynamic it was meant to protect. Rejection is often misunderstood as cruelty or emotional withdrawal. In reality, clear non-validation preserves structure when it is delivered without reactivity. Rejection does not mean dismissing emotion. It means refusing to reorganize oneself around it. When a man does not validate every feeling automatically, he communicates that emotions are allowed but not directive. This preserves orientation. The woman experiences this as stability rather than opposition. There is space for emotion without pressure for alignment. Rejection, when grounded, maintains polarity because it preserves difference. Validation erases difference in pursuit of harmony. Emotional systems require difference to remain alive. This is why relationships that avoid disagreement often feel emotionally flat. Rejection, when calm, introduces contrast without conflict. It signals that connection does not depend on agreement. This creates safety at a deeper level than validation ever could. The man remains present without becoming compliant. He does not withdraw, but he does not yield orientation. This balance sustains attraction, while allowing emotional expression to exist without control. Healthy validation is not agreement and not reassurance. It is acknowledgement without absorption. A man can recognize emotion without centering it. He can listen without adjusting posture. He can allow feelings without granting them authority. This form of validation feels grounded because it does not seek to change the emotional state. It allows it to exist. The difference is subtle but decisive. When validation is offered without urgency, it does not destabilize structure. The man remains internally aligned. The woman feels seen without feeling empowered to move the system. Emotional expression becomes information rather than leverage. This restores balance. Validation regains its proper function as recognition rather than regulation. The man no longer uses validation to maintain harmony. He uses presence to maintain coherence. This reduces emotional noise and increases clarity. Relationships become less reactive and more resilient. Validation stops being dangerous when it is no longer used to control outcome. There are moments when refusing to validate is the most stabilizing response a man can offer. Not because emotion is wrong, but because responding would reorganize the dynamic around it. Silence, neutrality, or simple acknowledgement without agreement preserves orientation. The man allows emotion to move without becoming the axis of interaction. This communicates independence of regulation. Emotional systems relax when they are not being managed. The woman feels less pressure to escalate or resolve. Feelings settle naturally. This is often misinterpreted as emotional coldness by men who equate responsiveness with care. In reality, it is emotional leadership. The man remains present without surrendering structure. Over time, this retrains the relationship. Emotional expression becomes cleaner, less performative, less charged. Validation is no longer required to feel safe. Stability emerges not from constant reassurance, but from the knowledge that emotion does not control direction. When a man understands this, he stops fearing rejection and stops overusing validation. He realizes that stability is not created by agreement, but by coherence, and coherence always outperforms approval. What ultimately restores balance in emotional systems is not reassurance, agreement, or constant acknowledgement, but the ability to let emotions exist without immediately responding to them. Many men feel compelled to validate because silence feels risky. They worry that without acknowledgement, emotion will escalate or be interpreted as rejection. In reality, the opposite is often true. Emotional systems calm when they are not being managed. When a man allows emotion to arise, peak, and settle without reorganizing himself around it, he communicates tolerance. Tolerance is not indifference. It is capacity. The woman experiences this as safety at a deeper level than validation ever provides. She feels that emotion is allowed without becoming directive. There is no need to intensify feeling to gain response. Over time, emotional expression becomes cleaner and less charged. The relationship stops oscillating between reassurance and anxiety. Validation, when overused, teaches emotion to demand attention. Non-reactivity teaches emotion that it does not need to perform. This distinction changes the entire dynamic. The man no longer feels responsible for regulating emotional states. He remains present, attentive, and engaged, but not absorbed. This preserves polarity and reduces emotional labor. Stability emerges not because emotions are suppressed, but because they are no longer controlling movement. When a man understands this, he stops fearing moments of emotional discomfort. He allows them to pass without interference. The relationship gains resilience. Emotional storms become shorter. Clarity replaces urgency. And at that point, validation regains meaning because it is no longer required for stability. It becomes a choice rather than a necessity. This is the final shift that most men never make, understanding that the strongest form of care is not constant affirmation, but the confidence to remain steady when affirmation is not given. Most men associate neediness with obvious behaviors: begging, jealousy, insecurity, or emotional dependence. They imagine neediness as something exaggerated and visible, something that happens only when a man has clearly lost control. Because of this narrow definition, they rarely recognize it in themselves. What they miss is that neediness is not a behavior, it is a posture. It is an internal orientation toward outcome. A man can appear calm, polite, attentive, and emotionally intelligent, while still being deeply needy underneath. Neediness often hides behind responsibility, consistency, and emotional effort. It feels justified. The man believes he is being caring, invested, or mature. Internally, however, his emotional state is tied to response. He monitors reactions, tracks shifts in tone, and feels unsettled when alignment is not immediate. None of this feels desperate. It feels involved. This is why neediness is so difficult to detect. It does not announce itself as weakness. It disguises itself as concern. Emotional systems, however, do not respond to labels. They respond to structure. The moment a man's internal balance depends on feedback, neediness is present. The woman senses this long before the man does. She does not experience it as insecurity. She experiences it as pressure. The relationship begins to feel heavier, not because of overt behavior, but because emotional movement now carries consequence. Until men understand that neediness is defined by dependence on outcome rather than intensity of behavior, they will continue embodying it without realizing why attraction fades. One of the most deceptive aspects of neediness is that it often manifests through socially approved behavior. A needy man does not always demand attention. He offers it excessively. He does not always seek reassurance. He preemptively provides reassurance. He does not always ask for closeness. He creates it by removing space. These behaviors feel generous, but they are compensatory. The man is not acting from abundance. He is acting to prevent discomfort. He fills silence because silence makes him uneasy. He explains himself because misunderstanding feels threatening. He stays emotionally available at all times because distance feels destabilizing. Each action seems reasonable in isolation. Together, they form a pattern of emotional overfunctioning. The woman experiences this not as care, but as emotional crowding. There is no space for her internal movement. Emotional systems require space to breathe. When a man removes that space in an attempt to feel secure, he communicates need without saying it. This is why reassurance often increases anxiety rather than reducing it. It teaches the system that stability must be constantly reinforced. Over time, the woman begins to pull back, not to punish, but to restore space. The man misreads this withdrawal as a signal to increase effort. The cycle deepens. Neediness is rarely loud. It is persistent. It lives in over-attention, over-availability, and over-adjustment. Until a man recognizes that these behaviors are driven by internal dependence rather than generosity, he will continue reinforcing the very dynamic he is trying to avoid. Neediness is particularly destructive because it rarely creates immediate conflict. There are no obvious arguments, no clear rejections, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, attraction fades quietly. The relationship becomes emotionally flat. The woman may say everything is fine, and in many ways it is. What is missing is polarity. Neediness collapses polarity because it removes independence of regulation. The man's emotional state begins to mirror the relationship rather than anchor it. This creates emotional symmetry, which feels safe but uninspiring. Attraction responds to asymmetry, not imbalance, but difference. When both people are emotionally oriented toward each other for regulation, the system loses direction. The man often feels confused by this shift. He believes he has done nothing wrong. He has been present, supportive, and consistent. What he does not see is that attraction does not respond to effort. It responds to orientation. Neediness makes the man predictable. Predictability removes informational value. His reactions carry no signal because they are guaranteed. Over time, the woman stops feeling emotionally pulled. She does not feel repelled. She feels unengaged. This is why neediness is more dangerous than overt insecurity. It erodes attraction without triggering alarms. By the time the man senses something is wrong, the dynamic has already reorganized. Understanding this requires abandoning the belief that good intentions protect against structural imbalance. They do not. Neediness does not disappear when a man suppresses desire or withdraws emotionally. It disappears when he reclaims internal independence. Emotional independence does not mean indifference. It means that the man's internal state is regulated internally rather than relationally. He allows connection to enhance his life, not stabilize it. This changes everything. His presence becomes lighter. His attention becomes selective rather than compulsive. He no longer feels the urge to fill space, correct perception, or manage emotional weather. The woman experiences this shift immediately. Emotional pressure dissolves. Interaction becomes cleaner. There is room again for curiosity, movement, and polarity. Emotional independence does not require strategy. It requires tolerance. The man must tolerate uncertainty without reacting to it. He must allow misalignment without rushing to resolve it. This tolerance communicates strength more clearly than any assertion ever could. Over time, neediness loses its function because the man no longer uses the relationship to regulate himself. Attraction returns, not because he tries to create it, but because the conditions that suppressed it are removed. When a man understands that neediness is not about desire, but about dependence, he stops trying to manage behavior and starts managing orientation. At that point, neediness no longer needs to be fought. It dissolves naturally. Neediness finally dissolves when a man stops allowing outcomes to define his internal state. As long as emotional alignment, approval, or continuity determine how he feels about himself, neediness will persist regardless of how disciplined his behavior appears. This is because neediness is not a flaw of character. It is a dependency of orientation. When a man measures himself through response, every interaction becomes evaluative. Silence feels like loss. Distance feels like rejection. Uncertainty feels like danger. None of these reactions are conscious choices. They are automatic responses produced by externalized regulation. The man does not chase because he wants to. He chases because not chasing creates discomfort. When he finally allows outcomes to exist without attaching his identity to them, the entire dynamic shifts. He no longer needs the relationship to confirm his value or stabilize his sense of direction. Emotional fluctuations stop carrying existential weight. He can be present without being invested in control. This presence feels radically different. The woman experiences it as freedom rather than pressure. There is no need to manage his reactions or protect his emotional balance. Interaction becomes cleaner, less charged, and more authentic. Neediness disappears, not because the man suppresses desire, but because desire is no longer tied to self-regulation. He wants connection, but he does not need it to feel intact. This distinction restores polarity instantly. The relationship regains movement. Attraction responds because the man is no longer trying to extract security from interaction. He allows outcomes to reveal truth rather than determine worth. At that point, neediness has nothing to attach to. It fades not through effort, but through detachment from outcome. This is the final shift most men never make, realizing that freedom from neediness comes not from becoming less invested, but from becoming internally complete, regardless of how the relationship unfolds.